They say, because I'm a Catholic, therefore I was anti-abortion. Well, I've been anti-abortion all my life.
I've seen people have targeted you for that belief.
My enemies have accused me of many things, but never yet of hiding my light under a bushel. It wasn't just a question of hard-hearted wicked Tories, it's actually common sense. You can't do that in politics.
Right. Hello and welcome to God TV Together, the podcast. This is our opportunity as a God TV family to get to know some of our friends and God TV family and get to take a biblical perspective on current issues, political issues, climate issues, whatever is the issue of the day. Now, I want to invite you to meet a very special guest today. We're very excited to have Ann Widdecombe with us. Ann, it's very nice to meet you.
Good to be here.
For those of you that are not in the UK, Ann is an ex-politician, an ex-MP, ex-MEP. She's also a TV and media personality. You are also an author and a political commentator, I guess. And we're so pleased to have you on the show. And today, I just really want to get to know a little bit about you and your faith journey and how faith has been a golden thread through everything you've done in your career. Now, obviously, you've had a long and prosperous and fruitful career, so we might have to glance across a few bits. But could we just start with your faith? Have you always had faith? Has it always been in your family, or is it something that you found?
I was brought up as a very practicing Anglican. We had a long tradition of vicars in the family. My brother was a vicar. My uncle was a vicar. My little nephew is a vicar.
Wow.
And so I always used to joke that the Widdecombe's existed to breed vicars for the Church of England. So it was a very, very practicing Anglican family. But I went to a Catholic boarding school. Then I went to Birmingham University and joined the Christian Union there and took part in the Billy Graham Crusades. And I went to Oxford University. But then I did go through a period of agnosticism. Now, everybody says, what brought you back? What happened? Well, there was no moment on the road to Damascus. There was no one moment when it happened. I always describe becoming an agnostic as the gradual erosion of belief, and the return to Christianity is the gradual erosion of unbelief. They were gradual processes. And indeed, one day I'd have said to you, yes, I'm a Christian. The next day I'd said to you, yes, I'm an agnostic. It wouldn't, it took a long time. So the short answer to your question is, have I always had faith? With the exception of that period. My mistake was that when I did return from agnosticism, I just drifted back into Anglicanism because that was familiar. That's what I'd always known, despite the fact that having looked at the C of E and the Roman Catholic Church from afar, that is from outside Christianity, I could see that whereas the Catholic Church said, this is true, that's false, this is right, that's wrong. No messing. That is so. You don't have to put it to a vote. The Church of England was trying to fill its pews and not succeeding by sacrificing faith to fashion, creed to compromise. Never seemed to know what it thought on any of the big issues of the day. And I think even when, as I say, I returned to a rather wishy-washy form of Anglicanism by then, whereas I'd been brought up in evangelical, what I should have done at that stage was to look at becoming a Catholic. My final straw with the C of E, and I was already carrying a huge bundle. It was just the final straw, not the sole cause. The final straw of my impatience with the C of E was when we had the debate over the priesting of women.
Right.
And that debate in the synod was not theological. It was not, is this right? Should we do this? It was, if we don't do this, we won't appeal to the modern world. That was the whole thrust of the debate. The Archbishop of Canterbury, the then Archbishop of Canterbury, George Carey, actually wrote me a letter saying, well, how could I, a woman MP, deny a woman a right to be a priest? And I wrote back and said, well, as far as I know, no MP actually stands in persona Christi at the point of consecration. No MP gives out the sacraments. And if I have to explain that to the Archbishop of Canterbury, of all people, then no wonder I've gone. I didn't quite phrase it that rudely, but that was the essence of it. So I left. I did not. I think everybody thinks I went from being a member of the C of E to being a Roman Catholic overnight, and I didn't. It took about 4 months in which I had to resolve an awful lot of doctrinal issues. Now, some people have said to me, well, did it matter? Why couldn't I just become a Catholic and have doubts about one or two things? Well, the fact is, if you're a cradle Catholic, you can have doubts about half the canon, and it doesn't make any difference. But if you're being received into the church, you have got to make a statement, and you make it out loud and very clearly at the time, and you say, I believe all the church teaches to be revealed truth.
Mm.
So if you have any reservations about any of the doctrines, you can't say that. So unless you're prepared to commit a major act of perjury at the point of being received, you've got to resolve all those issues. So I spent about 4 months resolving them.
Wow. So do you know one of those issues? What was something that really grabbed you that you had to resolve?
Oh, the only one that remained at the end, I didn't have any trouble, for example, with papal infallibility, because thou art Peter, and upon this rock, blah, blah, blah. And whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shalt be bound in heaven. Whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shalt be loosed in heaven. Very clear. So I didn't have any problem with that at all. But I did have a problem with, I think there's too great an emphasis on Mary. And I did have a problem also with purgatory. And purgatory was the one remaining issue at the end. And I went to see Cardinal Hume, as it then was, who was the head of the church, or the Roman Catholic Church in England. And I went to see Cardinal Hume, and I said to him, well, it's all done except this one thing. And he did manage to resolve it for me. So, and as for the Mary stuff, as I call it, the reality is that you have to say one Hail Mary every week in church. Apart from that, don't have to say the rosary, don't have to do anything. That's the only thing you have to do. And it's so mild that it's not worth a fuss.
Yeah. So you made this big change from Church of England to Catholicism. How did that impact your work? As an MP, obviously, you've always been open about your Christian faith, and we all thank you for that. But it has impacted your career for good and for the worse. And how did you deal with the conflict and the pressure that came around being a Christian MP?
I was very blessed, I think, because I was a member of the Conservative Party, and they still, at that stage, and largely still do, have free votes on big issues of conscience. So capital punishment, abortion, homosexual law, they're all free votes. And therefore, I never had a direct conflict. I think there was one such occasion, but I hardly ever had a direct conflict between what I believed and what I was being asked to do. So from that point of view, I was blessed. Some of the other parties did have pretty strict lines, but they also had some pretty good rebels as well. So it wasn't that easy. But I never really found a conflict because I was always completely upfront. Now, when the Hansard Society, Hansard, for anybody abroad who doesn't really know, Hansard is the verbatim record of all parliamentary proceedings. So anything you say in Parliament at all is recorded by Hansard. And they had an anniversary, I've forgotten which one, and they were publishing a book of speeches, and they invited various MPs to submit a speech. And I submitted one by Enoch Powell on embryology. And everybody thought, well, I'm doing that because it's embryology. But no, the reason I was doing it was the last time I could find that God was invoked in the course of a debate. Whereas once it would have been perfectly normal. I mean, Wilberforce would have talked about God. Oliver Cromwell would have talked about God. They would all have talked about God. It's now almost not the done thing. And people say to me sometimes, oh, but religion's a private matter. And I say, well, hang on. St. Paul says we believe and therefore speak. And I said, Christ said we mustn't hide our light under a bushel. And I said, my enemies have accused me of many things. but never yet of hiding my light under a bushel. So I think if you're upfront about it, it's not a problem. It's only if you yourself are embarrassed by it that it becomes a problem.
Right. So if we were to encourage people at home, you would say, get that light from under that bushel, put it on a lampstand.
Yeah, there's no point in having it under the bushel.
Yeah, it's good, Anne. It's really good. So, I've watched a lot of interviews, and you do seem to have been sort of attacked around your beliefs around sort of sexuality and abortion.
Heavily so.
Yeah, and these hot topics. Would you be prepared to sort of share why you take the stance you do and sort of how you dealt with that in a Christian manner?
Well, I mean, I took the stance on abortion. Everybody assumed it was because I'd become I was a Catholic.
Right.
And they say, because I'm a Catholic, therefore I was anti-abortion. Well, I've been anti-abortion all my life, including when I was an agnostic. And as I always say, actually, it works the other way around. I probably became a Catholic because I was pro-life, because we had those big pro-life bills in the late 80s when I was just in Parliament. David Alton's bill, then mine, then a government bill. Therefore, I came into contact for the first time, probably since leaving boarding school, with Catholics on a very daily basis, all working together. So it probably worked the other way. But no, I'm pro-life because I believe that life starts at conception. Once you start defining it any other way, you run into all manner of anomalies and problems. And therefore, I fought very hard. But politics is unlike religion, and as much as in religion you can say this is true, that's false. This is right, that's heresy. You can't do that in politics.
Right.
And we had arrived at this situation where we'd won at second reading for David Alton's big bill, which was to limit abortions to 18 weeks. Now, none of us believed in 18 weeks, so that was in itself a compromise, but it was the most we were going to get. In reality, we thought we'd get 20. Go for 18, try to get 18. And it became clear to us in the course of the debate on that second reading that people were lending us their votes. And they were only going to vote for us at later stages if we exempted all handicapped children from the provisions. So it would be 18 weeks for everybody else, but 28 weeks, as it then was, for handicapped. Now, that was anathema to us. As far as we were concerned, the unborn disabled child had exactly the same rights as the unborn able-bodied child. But we were going to lose the bill if we did it. And we looked at the figures, and there were a group of us that said, no, that's a compromise too far. We don't do it. We stand, we fall, we let the bill go down. I wasn't on that side. I said, look at the figures. 92% of all late abortions are not done because of handicap. They are done because of social reasons and all the rest of it. 8% are on grounds of handicap. Now, I said, no, supposing you had a shipwreck happening in front of your eyes and you knew for a certainty that you could only get 92 off that ship. There are 100 people on this ship and you can only get 92 off. Do you just stand and watch the whole ship go down and sacrifice those 92 lives for the sake of the 8 you can't save? So I was actually one of those advocating compromise. And those are the sorts of challenges that arise. It's not easy. It's not straightforward. It's not black and white, good and bad. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah. It sounds like an impossible decision. I wouldn't want to decide to not save 8,
If you're deciding what to do.
I know. It's
called responsibility.
Yeah. And, in that debate, people use terms like pro-choice and pro-life. And I don't think either of us disagree with those statements, independent of the context. And yet, we believe that life is sacred.
But what choice does the child have? When somebody says they're pro-choice, I say, this is interesting. What choice does the child have?
I agree.
Because the child has no choice at all. So, you asked me for, where I'd got to on some of my stands. I can't go through every single stand, but that was abortion.
Yeah. And also, how did you deal with the backlash from that? Because I've seen people have targeted you for that belief. Yeah. What kind of things have people said? And
at that time, in the late 80s and very early 90s, at that time, there wasn't a cancel culture. People would write really quite viciously. and they would criticise you, and they would try to drum up, support against you and all the rest of it. There wasn't a cancel culture. Now there is. And I found that out over not abortion, but over homosexuality, which has now got to the point where if you aren't prepared to affirm everything, that the woke say, and if you're not prepared to affirm gay marriage, then despite the fact that the law says very clearly that you do not have to, despite that, you can lose, you can lose engagements, you can lose income, you can be cancelled. And I went through that over a row over my views on homosexuality. So it was easier then. You held a view, you stuck to it. I used to say to constituents who were angry with me about any subject, I used to say to them, you've got a remedy in the ballot box. And oddly enough, my majority kept going up.
Well, you know, it's a breath of fresh air to hear somebody have some values and stick by them, because you can see in the political world people softening their stance to get votes, and it doesn't make you believe in them anymore.
No.
I mean, I can disagree with you, Anne, but I can like that at least you're clear and honest and we know what you think about.
Oh, when I first was standing, very, very first was standing in Maidstone, which was in 87, and I produced a leaflet, an election leaflet, with my stand on all the conscience issues, because everybody knew what I stood on the party issues, and that was in the manifesto. Mm-hmm. But I produced a leaflet, my stand on conscience, everything, capital punishment, hunting, anything at all, anything that was a free vote. Produced. And my agent said to me, you've just upset the entire of Maidstone because nobody will agree with you with every single one. I said, it doesn't matter. What they'll never be able to say is that they didn't know when they voted. And indeed, the majority went up that time as well.
So let's go back to the cancel culture. So what have you faced in the cancel culture? Like, what have you lost?
There was a big to-do. It was a couple of years back when I went along to an interview that was supposed to be about the Brexit party. And then right at the end, there was the gotcha question. And the interviewer resurrected some article I'd written in 2012 or something like this. And it was all about whether or not there could ever be what I've never termed as, but what is popularly termed as gay cures. Now, I've never used that expression. But my view was always, we used to think it was quite impossible for a man to become a woman or a woman to become a man. Science found a way. Maybe in the future. I didn't even put a value judgment on it, just maybe in the future. For those who want to transition from one sexuality to another, it may become possible. There may be a solution. That was sold out as, Widdecombe believes in gay cures, that I believe they were here now, which I certainly never said, that I believe they were a good thing, that I believed every homosexual should take advantage of them. Never said any of that at all. And my homosexual friends came very, very publicly, on board and said, she doesn't think that, and she didn't say that. For example, Craig Revel Horwood sent me a whole row of kisses. Amanda Barry left me a telephone message. I had people like Ian Dale and Andrew Pearce defending me in their various radio programmes. I think, but for them, the other side would never have been heard.
Yeah, wow. Well, thank God for them. Thank God for them.
Yeah, thank God for them. Yeah,
it is a really horrible part of society that.
As a result of that, yes, because you asked me about being cancelled. As a result of that uproar, I was doing a theatre tour. Loads of the theatres cancelled. Others took a very firm stand. The Lowther Pavilion up in Blackpool said, nope, as far as we're concerned, free speech. Yeah. It's not talking about that anyway. I was talking about Strictly Come Dancing, but free speech.
Yeah.
So one or two took very, very firm stands and gained good audiences as a result.
Yeah, good. Well, good. We'll come back to Strictly because that's exciting in itself. So you've dealt with your cancel culture, and we applaud you for that. And but that must have been hard. And because we're God TV, like, how did your faith support you through that time? Like, did you change your practice? Did you pray more? Did you go to mass more? How did it affect your faith?
No. The Catholic Church once made a saint out of a little boy. I can't remember his name now. But there were two boys talking about what they would do if they knew that the end of the world was coming that day. And then the first said, well, he'd go and he'd pray and he'd, repent his sins and blah, blah, blah. And the second little boy said, just stay here and carry on. And that was my attitude during this uproar. Carry on. Go where they'll have me. Forget those who won't have me. And I carried on. I was carried on utterly normally. Keep calm and carry on, which is not a biblical injunction, but a Churchillian injunction. And I think it's absolutely right. Keep calm and carry on.
It's very British. It's very good. So, some have also criticised you for your views on immigration and your support, your support for stricter border controls. And I don't need to get into that because it's not the political. But I do have a question about, when you look at some of the Christian teachings on, loving your neighbour and having grace and mercy and things like that, is how do you tie those two things together around, being tighter on immigration, but also,
very easily. Very easily. You just carry out a very simple exercise in logic. Could we take everybody who wanted to come here? The answer is no. We absolutely cannot. We haven't got the infrastructure. We haven't got housing. We haven't got the ability to do that. We can't take everybody who wants to come. Therefore, we have rules. And the international community has rules. We have the convention, the Geneva Convention on Refugees. And they don't say you can go anywhere you like. You've got to be fleeing persecution. And indeed, you've got to apply to the first safe country you come to, etc. And at the moment, of course, all the small boats are coming from France, which is a perfectly safe country. They're coming here because we're a softer touch. And so you have to apply the rules. Now, I can vividly remember when I was in the Home Office and in charge of immigration, and we had a hunger strike going on amongst some detained asylum seekers in, I think it was Rochester. And we had a hunger strike. And I said, no, we'll supply medical assistance where required. We'll make sure they have absolute access to food and water. We don't give in. We don't release them just because they're on hunger strike. Well, there was uproar. I was unchristian. I was this, I was that. Statements in Parliament. Labour Party win the next election, come in, do exactly the same thing when faced with a hunger strike. And some very affronted local Christians said to me, well, we thought this lot were different. And I said, OK, you tell me. What do you think will happen if government gives in when there's a hunger strike and just releases people? What do you think is going to happen? They'll all be on blinking hunger strike. And you could almost see scales falling from eyes as people realise that, no, actually, it wasn't just a question of hard-hearted, wicked Tories. It's actually common sense.
Yeah. I mean, you don't negotiate,
You don't negotiate with terrorists.
Right, and I'm not saying that they're terrorists.
No,
but
they
I'm saying,
won't. They won't. I don't think any of them will.
They're holding you. They're holding you to account in a way that isn't based in law or dialogue or politics. In fact, it's
I mean, again, I say, it comes down to responsibility. It's all very well for people to say, "Oh, you should be kinder. You should do the." Let them come and do it, and run the country on those lines and see what happens.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned about persecution, because immigration and the persecuted church kind of go hand in hand. And here at God TV, we're really passionate about the persecuted church because, we get to be a lifeline where, people can't go. God TV does go, and we get letters from people who are dependent on getting their gospel message and their teaching from God TV. And I saw a talk you did for, was it Church in Action?
Church to the Aid in... sorry. Church... Aid... Right, now I've got it. Aid to the Church in Need. That's what it was called. Aid to the Church in Need.
That's right. It's okay, everyone at home. I'm asking Anne about something that was in 2011, so it's a good memory. But I wondered if you could share some of your views on the persecuted church.
Yeah, I mean, at the time I said, and it was even quoted in Parliament, I'd left Parliament by then, and David Cameron replied, at the time I said it was easier to get help if you were a hedgehog than if you were a persecuted Christian. And I said I knew what I was talking about because I was a patron of the British Hedgehog Preservation Society and a patron of Aid to the Church in Need, so I knew exactly what I was talking about. And I said, you're better off being a hedgehog. There is a lot of persecution. There are countries where if you become a Christian from the majority religion, that is regarded as an apostasy, and you can be imprisoned, you can lose your life, you can be subject to honor killings. There are other countries where you can't set up a Christian community, you can't have a church, countries where you can't display a cross. And I have always said that just as when we're giving overseas aid, we take into account the position of women in that society. You know, they're going to be the ones carrying the water all the time. You know, we look at the position of women, latterly at the position of homosexuals. You know, you're going to throw them off tall buildings. We look at the position of all manner of minorities, and I would say quite rightly. We never, ever, ever look at the position of Christians. You never hear a minister saying, you know, we're cutting aid to this country because they persecute Christians. Mm. And in this country, it's low-level persecution, but it's still there. You know, a lot of interviewers have said to me, oh, but you can't call it persecution when you look at Pakistan and places, you know, you actually be killed for being a Christian. And I say, well, in that case, you've got two men together in the trenches. One has lost both legs. One has lost two toes. And so the toe chap can't call himself wounded. He's not entitled to call himself wounded in action. Right. And the fact that we're two toes here rather than both legs doesn't mean that we aren't persecuted. And it happens in all manner of ways. If you take traditional Christian teaching and you advocate it openly, you're likely to find yourself excluded from all manner of job opportunities, and you can even lose your job.
Yeah, and face cancel culture.
And I think we all remember the case of the British Airways clerk, who was just wearing a very small, I mean, it was very, very small. It was about this size, you know, very small cross. And they regarded it as a uniform violation when, you know, Sikhs could wear bangles and turbans and goodness knows what else. So we are persecuted in this country particularly if we're believing open, not prepared to hide it under a bushel, Christians.
What would your advice be for people that are facing small p persecution?
Carry on. That's crucial because it's easier said than done. You know, the fact is, in Parliament we can say what we like, and I've made this point many times. You know, we say what we like in Parliament, and nothing's going to happen to us as a result. But it's very difficult for somebody whose actual living could be lost, and so it's very easy for me to say carry on. But I think you do have to carry on because that is how the early church was built. And if the early church had taken the attitude that, I have to say it, the hierarchy of the Church of England takes at the moment, then quite honestly, we'd all still be worshipping Zeus. You know, the early Christians went for it. And I'm afraid my advice to anybody facing that sort of low-level persecution is stay courteous, stay calm, but don't give in.
Yeah, stick to your beliefs. Yeah. It's interesting you start to talk about the church. You know, there's a decline of, you know, the main religions in the UK. You know, what do you think the church, you know, what's the church's role in that? Like, what can the church be doing?
Well, the Catholic Church, of course, takes a rather different line, but we have an established church in this country. And I'm all in favour of an established church because, as I say, if you don't have an established church, you have no possible grounds for teaching religion in schools. None, if you haven't got an established church. You have no good reason to have your big ceremonies of state done, you know, as Christian ceremonies. None, if you don't believe that the king holds his crown by the grace of God. So I'm all in favour of an established religion. A lot of people expect me to be anti because it's the Church of England, but no, I want an established church. But that established church does not intervene in personal morality at all. It will hold government to account over immigration policy. Very good example. And it will take all sorts of very fashionable stands, but it won't actually pronounce on moral issues. And I believe very strongly that the church's role is to pronounce on anything and everything where you know, Christianity is involved. So not party politics. You need Christians in all parties because in a democracy, power changes hands. So if it's restricted to one party, you're consigning the country to a period of godlessness when government changes hands. You need Christians in all parties. I'm not talking about party politics. But, for example, how you define marriage, whether you dilute the definition of marriage, whether you give more benefits to people who are married or fewer benefits to people who are married, whether you encourage women to bring up children or, for that matter, men to bring up children rather than going out to work and handing it over to somebody else. All those are very, very serious issues. And the established church runs away from them.
So what's the church's role in rebuilding, the moral fabric of...
The church has a tremendous role. I mean, the church's main role is outreach. I mean, too often now, you think of a church as that building around the corner with a red barometer outside showing how much people have given towards the roof or something. That is not what the church is.
No.
The early Christians didn't have that idea at all. I do look at the early Christians as a model of what we should be doing.
Right.
Now, we can't all be St. Paul's and go on big missionary journeys and get shipwrecked and all the rest. We can't all be that dramatic. But we can all be St. Paul's in our own little community. And we can all say what motivates us and what we believe. And I don't believe anybody should ever be able to stop us doing that, because that is how the church grows. And then the church has a responsibility. I mean, its first responsibility, obviously, is to gather souls. But its responsibility on this earth, in earthly terms, is to relieve poverty, the relief of the poor. I mean, it's what Christ spent his healing and the relief of poverty. It's what he spent his life on this earth showing us. So the church has a responsibility within a community, whether it's running a food bank, and I've got reservations about food banks, but whether it's running a food bank or whether it's setting up a rota for elderly to be visited, whatever it might be, the church has that big role. Now, the interesting thing is that as soon as you get a government initiative and they want to involve the voluntary sector, first people they turn to are the local Christians, because, they're going to come on board, aren't they? And they're going to put some money in and they're going to, well, okay. But, if it's prepared to do it that way round, then it's got to be also at an individual level, whereby, people respect the cloth, basically.
So you've made an interesting change, not just in your church, but in your party politics recently.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about that? Because you've been a Conservative, your whole life, and now you're part of Reform UK. What's the difference and why have you made that choice?
Right. I left the Conservative Party initially for the Brexit Party after 55 years as a Conservative. I mean, I joined the Young Conservatives when I was 16.
Wow.
And in 2019, for the first time in my life, I voted other than Conservative, and I joined another party. And that was the Brexit Party. And the reason for that was the population had voted for Brexit. It may have been a narrow win, but nevertheless, it was 4%. And we had voted for Brexit. And the Theresa May government had spent all its time trying not to implement Brexit as the country had voted for. We had a deal that was a total sellout. And this had been going on. I mean, 2016, we'd voted to leave. This was 2019, and we still hadn't left. And I said, I'm sick of this nonsense, and I'm sick of sitting in an armchair moaning about it and do something about it. So I actually phoned up Nigel Farage and joined the Brexit Party. The Brexit Party then, in my view, ill-advisedly, after we got the 2019 general election result and the Conservatives came in under Boris, who had promised to, and I quote, get Brexit done, we said, right, that is our job done. And on the day that we left the EU, I mean, the Brexit Party had a big rally in Parliament Square, and as Big Ben chimed, we were all waving Union Jacks and cheering. But then we dissolved, and the Brexit Party thought its job was done, wrongly, and morphed into the Reform Party. The Reform Party held to the Brexit principles. It believes in the union, which I believe in very strongly, and I think we're imperiling it in Northern Ireland at the moment, much more so than in Scotland. And the Brexit Party also believes in stopping the boats and in lower taxes and in all the things that the Conservatives used to believe in.
Right.
But the Conservatives don't anymore. And Conservatives have got record taxes. This is a Conservative government, and we've got record taxes. Anyway, I hadn't joined Reform. I hadn't gone back to the Conservatives either and stayed politically homeless because I have issues with them over proportional representation. But I thought things have got to such a pass, proportional representation ain't going to come. Not for years.
What do you mean by proportional representation?
Well, at the moment in our country, we have a first-past-the-post system,
right?
Which means that the person who gets the most votes goes into Parliament, and the other votes aren't redistributed. Now, proportional representation is where if, say, 52% of people have voted, well, the other 48% get representation. Now, I've got big issues with proportional representation. I don't believe in it. And so I'd said to Reform, I'm not joining because of that. However, when the Conservatives just started taxing and betraying Northern Ireland, and they'd also betrayed the Afghan interpreters and heaven knows what else, and I hadn't been able to go back to them, I thought, right, proportional representation isn't going to come in the near future. I'll face that hurdle when it comes along. No point now letting it make me refuse to join the one party that, on most other issues at any rate, represents my own views. So I joined Reform. So Reform is a latter-day version of the Brexit Party. Okay.
And what impact did that have, in terms of your career and your friendships in the Conservative Party and your influence? What was the impact of that?
Well, the interesting thing is that in those European elections in 2019, when the Brexit Party stood everywhere, I ran into numerous Conservatives, including in the Carlton Club and in the corridors of power at Westminster. I met numerous Conservatives who told me, whispering behind their hands, that they were going to vote for the Brexit Party. There was a huge Brexit loyalty amongst certain of the Conservative ranks. And so, no, I didn't fall out with any friends. Now, there were quite a few reports of people losing friends because of Brexit. For a while, it was like an unarmed civil war. And families were divided, and some people did actually lose friendships on the basis of Brexit. I, to the best of my knowledge, haven't. And I still get on with the people who voted Remain. So, no, it didn't do me any harm. It caused me to be thrown out of the Conservative Party, but I expected that. After all, I joined another party. It caused me to be thrown out of the Carlton Club, despite the fact that half their membership voted Brexit, because, that is a Conservative club, so I understood that. But it didn't actually cause me to lose any personal friendships, at any rate, as I say, that I'm aware of.
Tell people about the Carlton Club. Like, what is that?
Yeah, sorry, I just threw that into the conversation without explaining. The Carlton Club is a club in what once would have been called a gentleman's club. That's the sort of idea. In central London, very near Westminster, which is based on adherence to the Conservative Party and Conservative Party principles. It used not to admit women at all. I was the first full woman member. A full member.
Congratulations.
As opposed to a full woman. First woman full member to join the Carlton. And I was the first woman full member to be thrown out of the Carlton.
Full circle. And these clubs, they're quite powerful places. Like it's where I understand conversations and decisions get made and influences.
Oh, the Carlton Club has a long association with the Conservative Party and with its history. I joined it, actually, when I was Shadow Home Secretary and in the Shadow Cabinet. And various people said to me, look, you must join the Carlton. You can't be a member of the Shadow Cabinet and not join the Carlton. So I joined the Carlton. Very, very quickly, I had the Chief Whip and the Party Chairman as my proposer and seconder, so I was in.
Lovely.
Are they these days places of power and conspiracy? Almost certainly less than they were. Almost certainly less than they were.
Why do you think that is?
I'm not sure, really. I think most of what goes on now goes on actually in Westminster itself and in the flats of MPs who live near Westminster. Little caucuses gather in flats. Well, You can't be seen gathering there. You could be seen gathering in the cauldron.
Right, I understand. So just moving the conversation on a bit to, like the next generation of Christian politicians. There's lots of programs out there like CARE and, Lyndon Bowering and people who are trying to advance young people's careers, Christians especially. But what advice would you give to young people who are interested in getting involved in politics but feel that their faith might be a hindrance?
Oh, well, I mean, if they're that wobbly, they shouldn't do it, period. Period. You can't go into politics with an attitude like that. Oh, I'd like to, but this might be a problem. Right. You go in with the attitude that you overcome problems. You don't waver and shiver on the brink, for goodness sake. You go in if that's what you want to do. You've got to be certain that it's what you want to do, because it isn't the easiest of lives. And it does demand, as I've said, some pretty big decisions in which it may not be as easy as saying this is right, that's wrong. It just may not. But my strong advice to any young Christian wanting to go into politics is go for it. Really go for it. Don't hide the Christianity. I mean, I've known people who think, well, they keep quiet about it for a while, and then let it all come out later. The answer is it doesn't come out later, because you're always trying to please somebody.
So, so you're saying to young people, it's going to be difficult, but also, if you've got beliefs, be convicted to them, be open and honest about them in the beginning, and sort of stick to your guns.
I mean, I think a very good example, we've had two. One is Kate Forbes, of course. Kate Forbes, a Scottish nationalist trying for the leadership, was heavily criticised because she holds particular Christian views. But before that, there was Tim Farron, who was actually the leader of the Liberal Democrat Party at Westminster, actually the leader. And he had to resign because of his views on gay marriage and that type of thing. Now, he made a mistake, because when he was the leader, there was an election, imminent, and this argument blew up. And obviously he thought that his first job was to keep everything stable. So he didn't say outright what he thought. He hedged about. And then much later on, after he'd resigned, he said he was wrong to hedge about. So my advice strongly is don't hedge about, say what you think. And say what I always said, take me or leave me.
Yeah.
You're entitled, leave me. Take me or leave me.
Yeah. And, we've talked about some of the pitfalls around, cancel culture and nasty letters and, whatever.
Oh, you can't be put off by a nasty letter.
No, I imagine not.
And do keep a sense of proportion. I remember vividly in the late 80s, when I'd made some very cross comments about NORAID. Now, NORAID was a fund for Northern Ireland, run by not by the American state, but by Americans, whereby they were pouring money into the IRA, basically.
Right.
And I made some very, very sharp comments about NORAID and said, do they realise what their money's being used for? Oh, and then I got a letter, and this was a supposed death threat from the IRA. And my staff were in such a state, and I just roared with laughter. And I said, since when did the IRA send you advance notice? They just do it. And if they want to do it, they'll do it. So throw it in the bin and get on with it. It wasn't from the IRA at all. I mean, it was some crank.
Yeah, wow. And so, but what are the good things like? What do people have to look forward to if they join a career in politics?
It's hugely rewarding. The constituency work is whenever you solve anything and you sort out an individual problem, you really have done something. And you do remember Christen Junction, to look after the least.
Yeah.
And it's the people at that end of the scale, the people without the influence, without the money, who very often need the most help. One of my best moments as an MP didn't come in any ministerial capacity. It came when I was a minister at the time, but I was acting solely in a constituency capacity when I got one of my constituents out of jail in Morocco.
Wow.
By which I mean I got him released. I didn't spring him from jail.
Right, yeah, you didn't break him out.
I didn't do that. But by the time his wife came to see me, he'd been convicted, he'd been sentenced, he'd lost his appeal, and he was doing 9 years in a Moroccan jail for a crime that not even the Moroccans really believed he'd committed. And my initial reaction was, what am I supposed to do about this? I can't intervene in the system of justice in this country, never mind somebody else's country. Anyway, I did the standard stuff through the embassies and got where I expected to get, which was nowhere. And then as the last throw of a dice that I was convinced was irretrievably loaded against me, I went out to Rabat. And I saw King's Counsellor, Justice Minister, Interior Minister, anybody else I thought might help, and came back home. And a few weeks later, the entire Moroccan government changed. So none of those people I talked to were there. But after a few little setbacks like that, the moment did come when I was able to phone his wife and say, John's out, he's with the ambassador, he'll be home in 48 hours. And her reaction told me why it was I'd become an MP. And I think the sad thing is that on both sides of the House of Commons and in all parties, the very big parties and the tiny little parties, the overwhelming majority of MPs can point to such moments when, because they were where they were and did what they did, however odd it might have seemed to others, they didn't make a drop of difference to the nation, they didn't make a trickle of difference to their constituency, but they made a tidal wave of difference to an individual family. Yeah, wow. And for any Christian wanting to enter Parliament, that should surely be one of the big attractions.
Yeah. I mean, that it's moving, and I guess it's that sense of Christ calling to look after the least, the last, and the lost. Not just to bring them into the Jesus family, but also to help them in their lives. I mean, it's unbelievable, really. I think there's a crisis of faith about politicians at the moment.
Oh, yes. Well, people have always been healthily cynical about politicians. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problems with the cartoons and the lampoons and all the rest of it. That is not a problem. But now there is an attitude. Yes, because I was saying to you just now, I mean, the sad thing is that, we've got people who do that. But the sad aspect is that most people think we're sleazy, we're lazy, and we're in it for ourselves. And that is a wrong view. We have a very low standard of parliamentarian at the moment because serious people are put off because of the image of Parliament. I mean, if you run a hugely successful business and you want to give something back and you can afford to give something back, do you really want to join a profession where every single bus ticket is held up to ridicule? I mean, you just don't want to. You don't want to join a profession whereby the media intrusion is not just on yourself, which it should be, but it's on members of the family as well. Think of Ewan Blair, Tony Blair's son, who celebrated his end of his GCSEs just a trifle too enthusiastically. He had a little snooze in Leicester Square, and he came to the attention of the constabulary. If that had happened to any other young man in the whole country, he wouldn't have got 2 lines in his local paper. That poor guy, for no reason other than that he was a prominent politician's son, he got banner headlines and coverage in all the news bulletins at 16 years old now. If you've got anybody in your family who've had something that you don't want to see churned up again, or who are vulnerable in any way at all, if you've got somebody in your family like that, you're not going to do it because that will be all over the papers. One of my colleagues in Westminster, one of my ministerial colleagues, his son was expelled. Now, people are expelled from school the whole time. You don't read about it in the papers, do you?
Every day, no.
Yeah. But he had big coverage in the national newspapers. I myself had a young relative off the rails. That was given coverage. And so serious people are put off joining Parliament, and that is bad news.
Yeah. So I guess my question is, as a family of Christians, how can we be praying for politicians, and how can we support our politicians better, knowing that really they're just human beings?
For a start, you could stick up for us more in public.
Okay.
And so when people say, politicians, they're all this, they're all that. No. Just say, no. They're human beings trying to do the best they can. And they're going to get it wrong because human beings are not fallible. I mean, not infallible. Yeah. We're fallible. We're going to get it wrong. And we will get a lot of things right. Everybody take that totally for granted. It's what we get wrong that everybody talks about. And we got an impossible job. And I would like to hear Christians standing up for politicians a bit more and not treating them as some sort of undesirable segment of society. Mm. But the interesting thing is, if you do polls, people will say, yes, MPs are corrupt, MPs are lazy. But my MP's good. Right. Because they've seen that MP in the constituency and the local papers. And if the MP's any good at all, he will have a good reputation for activity in the constituency. So they think he or she is different. In fact, there's 650 of those.
Yeah. Yeah, but everybody's passionate about their own MP. It makes complete sense. So moving away from politics, and you've also had a wonderful career of late in
showbiz.
Media, in showbiz. We share a love of dancing, and
I don't love dancing, and it wasn't dancing. I mean, Anton called it many things, but he never called that dancing.
You seem to have a very good time. So for people at home, we're talking about Strictly Come Dancing, and if you're not from the UK and you don't know the programme, it's a lovely programme about ballroom dancing, and you were a contestant on the show.
Yes, I thought I was going to last a fortnight. At the most 3 weeks. And I thought, this is a good thing because you get paid for, regardless of whether you stay in or not. They have to do that because otherwise nobody would do it. So I thought, this is good. This will be the best paid couple of weeks I've ever had in my life. And I stayed in right up until the 10th week.
Wow.
But it was huge fun. I mean, it was enormous fun. It sent my retirement on a completely different course. Because I'd always refused Strictly. They'd come to me for 5 years and I'd said no every year. And then I retired and I thought, right, I don't owe anybody any duty of time or of dignity. I can do this now. So I did it, expecting it to last, as I say, just a couple of weeks and to be a flash in the pan and over. And as a result of doing Strictly, they asked me to do the live tour, which I did. As a result of the live tour, I was asked to go into pantomime. As a result of being in pantomime, they asked me to go on at the Royal Opera House. Don't worry, I didn't sing. It was a spoken role. And so on. And so it just took it in a direction that I hadn't predicted. If you'd said to me early in 2010, I retired in 2010. If you'd said to me early that year, well, what are you going to do when you've retired? I would say, well, I'm going to live on Dartmoor, which I have. And I'm going to go on writing books and I shall walk some dogs on the moor and I shall have a very peaceful time. Didn't happen like that at all.
No, it sounds like it's been a very full retirement. Tell us a little bit about some of the other TV stuff you've done as well. Yeah. So what's the political commentary show?
I do GB News a lot. I do Talk TV quite a bit.
Yeah.
GB News more. And I do every fortnight or so, I'm on Jeremy Vine. So I have a lot of regular commentary, but I also have all the one-offs, of course, all the time. And I write for the Daily Express. Very good column every Wednesday, folks. I write for the Express. So I've retained a political interest through commentary. But the difference between that and being in Parliament is that I could tomorrow morning, if I so decided, give up the commentary. When you're in Parliament, you've got a responsibility for the rest of that Parliament until the general election. And that was why I retired when I did. It was 2007, and my constituency said to me, did I want to run again? And if I had run again, it would have been 3 years of that Parliament and then 5 years of the next Parliament. It was 8 years. I knew I didn't want to do 8 years. I would have willingly rendered 4 or 5, but that would have meant going in the middle of a Parliament, which would not have been a responsible thing to do. So I knew I could do 4 or 5. I didn't want to do 8. I knew I didn't want to do 8. So I said, no, I'm not standing again, and announced my retirement. And I forget why I've suddenly embarked upon this tale, but that was why. It was because when you're retired, when you're semi-retired, and you're doing something, you can always say, I'm stopping now. You can't do that in Parliament. You've got to go on to the election.
So what's the plan for the future, Anne?
I don't have one because I have grown so used to the fact that, that life is what happens, when you're making plans to be doing something completely different. So just life gets in the way. As I say, I never, ever expected to have a career in showbiz. That I'd already made documentaries. I'd done the more serious side of television. But I hadn't, I'd never done, and I had done a couple of serious reality shows, but not those sorts of reality shows, not the big ones. And I never thought that would be, the Royal Opera House, I mean, come on.
It's a dream come true.
Yeah,
and
well,
Celebrity Big Brother.
It was a nightmare come true. Was for them, yeah.
And you did Celebrity Big Brother as well, is that right?
I did Celebrity Big Brother in 2018. Now, that was an interesting one because I'd always refused. And I said to my agent, or whatever you do, I said, I know the pay's good and I know, it gets an all big audience, but I don't want to do it. It's voyeurism, it's ghastly. I can't imagine being shut up in a house with people. They put you with people.
How long was it for?
Oh, well, no, this is the point. Being shut up with people and blah, blah, blah. And then Big Brother decided that they were going to do a different sort of Big Brother in celebration of 100 years of the women's suffrage. And initially they wanted to call it Big Sister, but the channel wouldn't wear it. And the idea was that, first of all, it would just be women in the house, and then we would have the men in, but all the themes and the debates, etc., would be around women's suffrage, and it was going to be much more serious, and we were going to have much more serious people in there. So I thought, right, okay. And I said, yes, but supposing they don't stick to that. And he said, well, you're not in the jungle. You're not in Australia. It's not like I'm a celebrity, get me out of here. You're in Elstree. You walk out of the door and you're in London. Where's your big problem, Anne? So I decided to do it. And I honestly thought, and so did most of the production team, if not all of them, I honestly thought that I would walk out after about a week. And sure, I'd sacrifice all the pay, but I would walk out because I couldn't stand the experience. And in fact, what actually happened was, I can't say I enjoyed it, but my competitive instincts kicked in. I wanted to win this darn thing. And I endured 4 weeks of it, and I was the runner-up at the end.
That's amazing, Anne. I mean...
Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah, I am still amazed when I think about it.
Yeah. I mean, you've gone from a politician to an entertainer by just being yourself, a lot of the time. And I think it's something that I'm certainly learning from talking to you is maybe I want to understand what that identity in Christ is that I have and, get my light out.
I mean, I have done it by being myself. I mean, my agent rang me up over the Royal Opera House and I said, come on. Is it April the 1st or something? And she said, no, I got the brief here. Very rude, autocratic old lady. I said, oh, not much acting required.
That's funny. Yeah, I don't think you're rude, but I know that you.
Oh, I am, and I can be, and I will be if I think it's necessary. I will be.
I feel warned. So just to close the conversation and to go back to your faith, what do you think the golden thread of Jesus has been in your life through, all the different points in your career and all the highs and lows? Like, how have you clung on to God during that time?
I think by that biblical injunction, which I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, we believe and therefore speak. And I commend it to every single person listening to this. We believe and therefore speak, not we believe and shut up.
So, from Anne and myself, we hope you've enjoyed today's conversation. And thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate you. We value your opinion and your rudeness if you want to bring it. It's a good laugh. And I just encourage you at home with what Anne said to examine your faith and to speak life into it, not to hide that light under a bushel. So from myself, Anne, and all the God TV family, we say goodbye and we'll see you next time.